A mother pushed a stroller down a busy Cleveland street on a warm summer afternoon. Inside, her 1-year-old sleeps peacefully in the back seat, but in the front, her 3-year-old son sits completely still. Too still. His small body slumped forward, skin growing pale and cold. She walks for over 2 miles like this, past pedestrians, past storefronts, past people who have no idea they're looking at a dead child. When she finally reaches her destination, a Family Dollar store, she doesn't scream. She doesn't frantically pull her son from the stroller. She doesn't check his pulse or shake him awake. Instead, she parks the stroller outside, tucks a flyer into the seat without even glancing at him, and calmly walks inside to ask for a phone. Because Tamika Egleton already knew her son was dead. She'd known for hours. The real question isn't what happened to 3-year-old Curtis Witcher. The evidence written across his broken body would answer that soon enough. The real question is why the system gave him back to her in the first place. If you're someone who believes these stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button right now. Every subscription helps us continue bringing these forgotten cases to light. Your support means everything. Now, let's get into the story of Curtis Witcher, a little boy who deserved so much better. June 14, 2023, Cleveland, Ohio, 3:20 in the afternoon. A 911 call shatters an ordinary Wednesday. We need some paramedics here on 79th and UCLA. I believe this kid is not breathing. I guess he fell at a park, a water park. Cleveland police officers arrive at a Family Dollar parking lot where paramedics are already performing CPR on a small child, 3-year-old Curtis Witcher. The boy is completely unresponsive. His lips are blue. His skin is cold to the touch. Officers immediately begin trying to piece together what happened, but the story they're getting doesn't make sense. A bystander approaches, still shaken by what she just witnessed. She came up and ran in the dollar store and asked all of us for our phones. We all called 911. I was on the ground with, I don't mean to call him this, but a white man. He was giving him air and I was trying to search for his pulse. He did not have a pulse. The officer asks what happened to the baby. We don't know, she said he fell. Inside the store, employees tell the police the same strange story. The mother claimed her son fell at a water park, but when she arrived at the Family Dollar, the child was already unconscious in the stroller. She said nobody would call 911 for her. When she got here, the baby was already hurt. Officers learned the mother had 2 children with her, both in a double stroller. While 3-year-old Curtis lay dying in the front seat, her 1-year-old sat perfectly healthy in the back. The mother is identified as 30-year-old Tamika Egleton. She's hysterical, nearly impossible to interview. Both children are rushed to Rainbow Bobby's and Children's Hospital along with Tamika. But there's an immediate problem with her story. Police search for nearby water parks or splash pads. There are none in the area. An officer radios back to the scene. She said this happened at a water park. Is there like an outdoor splash park around here? Not that I know of. At the hospital, officers try to get more details from Tamika, but she's too distraught to provide clear answers. She's crying, hyperventilating, barely coherent. She eventually names a location, Lonnie Burton Recreation Center, a facility with a splash park about 2 miles from the Family Dollar. Then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just 40 minutes after the initial 911 call, 3-year-old Curtis Witcher is pronounced dead. What comes next will turn this tragic accident into something far more sinister. The following morning, the medical examiner performs Curtis's autopsy. What they find shatters any remaining possibility that this was an accident. Curtis's small body tells a story of systematic, brutal abuse. Abrasions and lacerations cover his head, neck, and torso. The bruising pattern is consistent with being struck by a belt over and over again. But the fatal injury, the one that killed him almost instantly, is internal. A laceration to the back of his heart. Someone had struck this 3-year-old child with such devastating, unimaginable force that it tore the tissue of his heart. His chest cavity filled with blood. According to the medical examiner, Curtis died within minutes, possibly within seconds, of receiving that injury. The manner of death is officially ruled a homicide. Tamika's 1-year-old son is immediately removed from her custody. A full investigation begins. And investigators quickly discover something that makes this case even more heartbreaking. Curtis had only been back with his mother for 3 months. He spent nearly his entire life, from 1 week old until January of 2023, in foster care with a woman named Michelle who loved him as her own son and had been planning to adopt him. So the questions become urgent and unavoidable. Why was Curtis taken from his mother in the first place? And more importantly, why was he returned? Detectives sit down with Tamika to get answers. Why was he taken away from you? Tamika's voice is soft, almost childlike. I was hospitalized with him when I was pregnant for a couple months. I lost my home because I couldn't pay my rent because I was hospitalized for months. And basically, I grew up in foster care. I have no support. So they thought I couldn't take care of him because I didn't have support. But this isn't the whole truth. Not even close. And as investigators are about to learn, getting any semblance of honesty from Tamika Egleton will be nearly impossible. Remember that splash park Tamika mentioned, Lonnie Burton Recreation Center. Detectives pull the surveillance footage from the facility. They also sent officers to interview the staff members who were working that day. A detective places a phone call and puts it on speaker so Tamika can hear. "Sergeant, did you review the video and download the footage from the splash park and the surrounding buildings?" "Yes, I did." "Okay, did I send you a photograph of the female I was looking for?" "Yes, you did." "Okay, did you see that female at any moment at the park on Wednesday the 14th? "No, she was never there." "Okay, and you spoke to a worker there?" "Yeah, we have a resident worker who mans the splash park when it's open, and she never saw that female or those children there either." The detective hangs up and looks directly at Tamika. "We were at that splash park." "Yep." But the lie goes even deeper than just the location. The paramedics who first arrived on scene noticed something deeply troubling from the moment they touched Curtis's body. In their official report, they documented that Curtis was cold and clammy to the touch when they arrived. A detective leans forward in his chair. He had been deceased for some time, enough for his body temperature to drop and give them that feeling of being cold and clammy. Does that make sense? Tamika shakes her head. "No, ma'am. If he was unresponsive earlier than you thought, and you just don't want to say." "I don't know. That's what I'm trying to tell you, I don't know." Another detective, a woman, speaks more gently. "But he's with you, so." "When he was in the stroller, I thought he was asleep. Both my kids were asleep. They do this every time I put them in the stroller and we take a long walk. They will fall asleep. I'm thinking my baby is asleep. I'm not thinking my baby is dead or none of that. I'm not thinking like that." The lead detective steps back into the room. He's just received the full autopsy report. What he's about to reveal will change the entire direction of this interrogation. "He actually had marks across here." The detective gestures across his torso, and they were almost like whip marks. They were patterned, so it was consistent all through his midsection, bad enough where even the tip of his penis was damaged. The room falls silent. Tamika immediately becomes defensive. "I don't whoop my kids. I don't whoop my kids." The detective doesn't break eye contact. "Then who does?" There's a long pause. Tamika looks down at her hands. "Robert disciplines them. Well, not them, but Robert disciplines Curtis. Robert is the father of 3-year-old Curtis, Tamika's 1-year-old son, and her unborn child. The detective asks her to describe what Robert does. Like he'll pop him or, he'll punch him, not with a lot of force, or he'll hit him in his thighs if he pees on himself. He disciplines him. Investigators bring Robert in for questioning later, that same day, to confirm Tamika's claims. But according to Robert, Tamika is solely responsible for discipline. He doesn't live with her and is rarely around the children. So you don't know what her form of discipline is, the detective asks. In my eyes, put him in the corner. Don't give him no snacks. That's what she presents to me. Back in her interrogation room, Tamika maintains her story. I don't whoop my kids. I put them in the corner. That is my punishment because I know how it feels to get beat. Punishment is standing in a corner. I never whoop my kids. I don't pop my kids. I don't whoop my kids. I don't do none of that. But Robert tells investigators something different. He says Tamika would often ask him to discipline the children when they misbehaved, but he always refused. She would want me to pop them when they peed on themselves. She wanted me to, but I don't. Someone is lying, and the evidence on Curtis's body will eventually reveal who. Tamika claims that 3-year-old Curtis often wet himself and peed in his bed during the night, something that supposedly made Robert furious. She also alleges that Robert has been physically abusive toward her. A detective asks directly, "Did Robert put his hands on you?" "Yes." "How physical is it?" "Bad. One time he gave me a black eye. I had to cover it up because I didn't want them to take my son. I was stupid and I stayed, but he's all I have." Court records show that in February of 2023, just 4 months before Curtis's death, Tamika reported to a caseworker that Robert had been abusing her for months and had struck Curtis after he urinated on himself. Robert denied any abuse at the time and promised to stay away from Tamika. But he didn't keep that promise. Tamika's voice breaks as she speaks. "He's all I have. If I get him in trouble, I have nothing. I have no support. I have nobody. Literally, I have nobody." The detective's voice is firm but not unkind. "What are you protecting? What are you doing? What happened? Are you willing to go to prison for the rest of your life for Robert?" "No." "Then there's no protecting anyone at this point. We need to know." "That's what I'm telling you. I'm telling y'all what I know." But the detective pushes harder. The more you continue down this path of trying to cover something up, you're going to separate yourself from the child that you have now, and you're going to separate yourself from the child that you're carrying. Finally, Tamika begins to crack. She starts describing what happened on the morning of June 14th, the day Curtis died. "Robert gets up before me. That's when I woke up because Curtis was crying and I'm like, it's still dark outside. Like, what is he crying for?" Robert was like, "Oh, I just whooped him because he just peed through the bed. And if y'all go to my house, y'all will see his underwear, the same underwear that he had on when he went asleep sitting in my bathroom on the floor. It's covered in urine. His whole bed is still wet with urine. That's in the living room." Crime scene investigators are dispatched to Tamika's apartment. They don't find the underwear on the bathroom floor like she claimed, but they do locate a pair of stained children's underwear in the bathtub. Tamika continues, "He wasn't himself that morning after Robert whooped him. He wasn't himself. He was coughing. He wasn't himself. He didn't want to eat. He didn't want to drink nothing. I made his favorite food, pizza. He didn't even want to eat the pizza. And I swear if y'all go to my house, I even wrapped it up in aluminum foil and put it in a plastic bag. We were going to eat it when we got home. He didn't even want to eat. He didn't want to drink no water. He didn't want nothing. I'm thinking, okay, he's probably still hurting. He's probably just not feeling good. That's what I'm thinking. I'm not thinking he's about to die or none of that. I'm not thinking none of that." Her voice drops to almost a whisper. "He said that his chest was hurting from his dad whooping him. And when I confronted Robert about it, I was going to be next. Tamika breaks down completely, sobbing into her hands. I'm so sorry. I should have never let him whoop him. I didn't know. I didn't know how severe it was. The detective moves closer to her, his voice softening. So you never went to the splash park? Tamika shakes her head. No, that was a story he told me to tell. Who told you to tell that? Robert told me to say that. I don't want to get hurt anymore. Why would Robert tell you to say you took him to the park? Because we didn't go anywhere. We just got them back. We didn't want to lose them again. Okay, but who is he afraid of finding out? Child services. From what? Robert wasn't even supposed to be around them. At all. They didn't want Robert around the kids at all because he was beating on me. They didn't want him around them. But I was still allowing him because that's their dad. Based on Tamika's damning allegations, detectives make the decision to arrest Robert for the murder of his son. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. It helps more people find this case and hear Curtis's story. Robert is brought into a separate interrogation room. He has no idea what Tamika has just told the police. When asked directly, he openly admits that despite promising to stay away from Tamika, he spent the night with her on the evening of June 13th, the night before Curtis's murder. But according to Robert, Curtis was perfectly fine and completely unharmed when he left for work early the following morning. He says he stayed at work all day until receiving the tragic phone call about his son's death. Still, investigators have no choice but to act on Tamika's allegations. An officer approaches Robert with handcuffs. You're going to be under arrest right now. Robert's face falls. What? I love my son. I understand. I did nothing. This is nothing personal, but because it's a 3-year-old, we have to verify your story because she made a whole bunch of allegations. Robert's voice cracks. That was my little man. I love my man. You're going to be held overnight while we verify your story. Robert begins to cry. I love my son. If I knew he was going to be like this, I would have left him in foster care. He would have been better off there. Robert's sister, who has been suspicious of Tamika's story from the very beginning, enters the room to comfort her brother. The detectives explain why he's been placed in handcuffs. She finally admitted that she didn't go to the splash park, but she's saying that she had to say that because Robert told her to stick to the story or you'll never see them again. That's why you have your job, that's why you have your job to back you up, and that's what we had to look into. And this is the key point. Curtis was heavily abused. He had bruises from head to toe. Robert's sister isn't surprised. She'd noticed troubling signs for months. We kind of figured something was wrong. Curtis wasn't potty trained when Robert would leave. We tried to tell ourselves it was just taking longer for him, but we knew something wasn't right. Robert insists he never disciplined the children, let alone beat them. She would want me to pop them when they peed on themselves. She wanted me to do it, but I never did. I don't believe in that. He claims he wasn't even told why his son was placed in foster care in the first place. But police records tell a different story. Curtis was removed from their care as an infant due to neither parent being able to provide stable housing, as well as Tamika's ongoing mental health issues, which, according to the official report, interfere with her ability to provide adequate care for the children. The records also reveal something even more devastating. Tamika has lost custody of all of her children, except the 1-year-old. Robert's sister speaks up, her voice filled with disbelief. She mentioned she had another baby that passed away, but the child was buried in Georgia. She never mentioned the baby's name or anything like that. She just said, I got a child here and a child in Georgia that's already buried, and I don't know if I want to bury my child or cremate him. We never even knew about the birth of that child. Curtis's foster mother, a woman named Michelle, had raised and cared for him since he was just 1 week old. According to court documents, Tamika attended weekly visits in the beginning. She bonded with the baby. She fed him and changed him. She seemed to genuinely care. But as time went on, everything began to fall apart. Tamika started threatening and cursing at caseworkers. She refused to take her prescribed medications. She failed drug screens. She visited less and less often. But in the interrogation room, Tamika tells a completely different story. I had an issue with the foster people whooping him. I don't believe in that. I have paperwork where I used to complain when my son would come visit us with black eyes, bleeding from his ears. He had whip marks. He had scratch marks all around his neck. I used to complain about that, and they said there was nothing that I could do because he was not in my care. This is a complete fabrication. While concerns were raised about Curtis's safety and well-being during this time period, those complaints came from the foster family, not about them. One report documented that during overnight visits with Tamika, Curtis would return to Michelle's home wearing the same clothes he'd left in, and those clothes were soaked in urine. He was hungry. He was clearly not being cared for properly. There were 0 complaints filed about scratches, black eyes, welts, or bleeding while Curtis was in Michelle's care. None. Tamika's own arrest record paints a disturbing picture: domestic violence, grand theft auto, resisting arrest, contempt of court, assault, aggravated menacing. Yet despite all of this, despite a documented history of not completing drug screens, not attending counseling, not taking her medications, in January of 2023, Judge Allison Floyd ordered 3-year-old Curtis to be returned to his mother's full custody. In her official order, Judge Floyd ruled that returning Curtis to Tamika Egleton would not be contrary to the child's best interest. Protective supervision was terminated. 5 months later, Curtis was dead. As the interrogation continues, the detective shares another critical detail from the autopsy. The doctor said he had an extreme amount of bruising, a lot in the neck area and the midsection, and a lot of what she considered blunt force trauma. She also said the fatal damage was a laceration to his heart, and that is caused by something striking him, something hard. And according to the medical examiner, he pretty much passed away immediately. Given this fact, it becomes nearly impossible to believe that Tamika didn't know Curtis was already dead before she placed him in the stroller. Robert's sister finds the entire timeline highly suspicious. She was like, "Well, I put him in the stroller and we walked to the plaza." And she said that when she was at the plaza, that's when she turned around and noticed that Curtis was unresponsive. She said she just burst out screaming, and then suddenly there was a crowd of people, and she said that a man came and got him out of the stroller and did CPR. The detective confirms this, is what bystanders reported. That is true, and by the time paramedics and police came, he was already gone. But according to the autopsy, Curtis was likely already deceased before he was ever placed in that stroller. The medical examiner's findings are devastating. Abrasions and lacerations covered his head, neck, and torso. The bruising pattern was consistent with being struck repeatedly by a belt. He was hit with such brutal, unimaginable force that it lacerated the back of his heart, causing his chest cavity to fill with blood. The detective looks directly at Tamika. He lost that blood so quickly he would not have lived for more than minutes. Do you understand what I'm saying? Tamika nods, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I promise you I didn't know. What happened? I'm telling you, that's what happened. That is exactly what happened. So you're telling me Robert beat him and left, and you put him in a stroller? I didn't put him in the stroller. Curtis put himself in the stroller. I'm walking, and I'm thinking that they both fell asleep. But then, given more time to think about her story, Tamika changes it again. Robert carried him. He put him on his shoulder, put his seatbelt on. We started walking down the path that we always take, and then we went our separate ways. So was Robert planning on going to Family Dollar with you? I believe so. I can't really say for sure. I believe he was, and then he received a phone call and he kissed us and he went his separate way. Surveillance footage will later prove this is yet another lie. Video from a nearby bus stop captures Robert boarding a bus to work at 8:19 in the morning, nearly 7 hours before Tamika would begin her walk to the Family Dollar. Time cards and workplace surveillance prove he remained at work the entire day until he received the devastating phone call about his son's death. Additional surveillance footage shows Tamika arriving at the Family Dollar around 3:08 in the afternoon. And the video does little to support her claims that this is the moment she discovered Curtis was unresponsive. When she arrives, Tamika pushes the stroller to the side of the entrance and simply stands there. She doesn't appear frantic. She doesn't appear worried. She just stands. A man walks up and hands her a flyer for a local business. She takes it, tucks it into the stroller, and without ever acknowledging her children, continues to linger near the entrance. Finally, she peeks into the store but doesn't appear to ask anyone for help. She simply looks inside and then closes the door again. Then, without ever once touching Curtis, without checking for a pulse, without attempting to wake him, she walks inside and asks a store employee for a phone to dial 911. Only when a crowd begins to gather does anyone realize the toddler in the stroller is pale and completely unresponsive. Bystanders quickly pull him from his seat and lay him on the curb to perform CPR. That's when Tamika suddenly begins jumping up and down, appearing to be in a state of panic. The store manager who witnessed the entire scene describes it as feeling staged. She didn't seem like a grieving mother. We asked her about funeral services and what she wanted to do, and she was walking around normally, like nothing really happened. Neighbors who are interviewed later tell investigators that Tamika would often complain about Robert, but not because he was violent or abusive toward the children. She complained that he wouldn't discipline the children, that he wouldn't so much as raise his voice at them. Tamika's own foster mother describes her as someone who could lie very convincingly. The evidence speaks for itself. Robert is released after spending one night in jail. No formal charges are ever filed against him. Curtis's autopsy revealed something even more heartbreaking than his cause of death. Evidence showed he had been beaten repeatedly in the weeks and months leading up to his murder. For Michelle, Curtis's foster mother, the woman who had cared for him since he was 1 week old, this discovery was absolutely devastating. After Curtis was returned to Tamika's custody in January, Michelle still tried to visit him. She still tried to look after him. She refused to stop caring for the child she loved and had been planning to adopt. But she had no legal standing, no parental rights, no say in his well-being. All she could do was watch from the outside and pray he would be okay. He wasn't. 5 days following the murder of 3-year-old Curtis Witcher, 30-year-old Tamika Egleton was arrested. She was later indicted on 1 count of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, 1 count of felonious assault, and 1 count of endangering children. In September of 2023, while awaiting trial, Tamika gave birth to her new baby. According to court documents, the infant and her 1-year-old son were placed together in a foster care home. On June 11, 2024, nearly 1 year after Curtis's death, Tamika pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal. 2 of the 5 counts were dropped in exchange for her guilty plea. During her sentencing hearing, Tamika addressed Judge Holly Gallagher directly. "I should have never gotten him back. I wasn't fit to be a mother." Curtis's foster mother, Michelle, also delivered a statement at the sentencing. She walked up to the podium, turned to face Tamika directly, and said, "You are no mother, you're a monster." Judge Gallagher sentenced Tamika Egleton to a total of 31 to 35 years to life in prison, with 409 days credited for time served. Tamika will be eligible for parole when she is in her early 60s. This case raises questions that have no easy answers. How does a child who spent nearly his entire life safe and loved in foster care end up dead just months after being returned to a mother with a documented history of instability, violence, neglect, and mental health issues? How does a judge rule that returning Curtis to Tamika's custody would not be contrary to the child's best interest, despite overwhelming evidence pointing to the opposite conclusion? How many red flags were ignored? How many warning signs were missed? How many people in positions of authority failed to protect a vulnerable 3-year-old boy who had no voice and no choice in where he lived or who raised him? Curtis Witcher should be alive today. He should be 7 years old. He should be in school. He should be playing with friends. He should have been adopted by Michelle, the woman who loved him unconditionally, who fought for him, who would have given him the safe and stable home he deserved. Instead, he was failed by a system that is supposed to protect children like him. And he paid the ultimate price. Curtis was just 3 years old when he died. 3 years old. Rest in peace, Curtis. You deserved so much better. If you made it to the end of this story, take a moment to reflect. What do you think could have been done differently to save Curtis? Do you think the family court system needs major reform? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your voice matters. And if you think this story was heartbreaking, wait until you hear what happened in our next case. It involves a missing child, a mother's desperate search, and a secret that was buried for over 20 years. Subscribe to Cold Case Crimes for more true crime stories that keep you thinking long after the video ends. Every subscription helps us bring light to cases that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.